The first thing I removed wasn't my office key. It was my nameplate. 42 years of my life were engraved on that small brass plate. Walter Harrison, founder and president. I held it in my hands for exactly 5 seconds before placing it quietly on my desk and walking out of the office I had built when Ronald Reagan was still president. Not because I had retired, because my own son had just made sure everyone in my factory believed I was nothing more than a useless old man. My name is Walter Harrison. I'm 72 years old and live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. 42 years ago, I started Harrison Industrial Components with one used milling machine, a $23,000 bank loan, and a promise I made to my late wife, Susan. If I succeed, I told her while sitting on the tailgate of my pickup truck, I won't just build a company. I'll build something that feeds families long after I'm gone. Turns out I kept that promise. Today, Harrison Industrial employs nearly 200 people. We've manufactured industrial parts for some of the largest construction companies in the Midwest for more than 4 decades. But if you ask any worker who's been with me longer than 20 years what made our company successful, none of them will talk about the machines. They'll tell you about people, about how I paid for Joe Mitchell's wife's cancer treatments 20 years ago when his insurance refused to cover them, about how I quietly paid 3 semesters of college tuition for one of our welder's daughters because he was too proud to ask for help, about how no employee in my factory ever missed Christmas because they couldn't afford gifts for their children. That factory wasn't simply my business, it was my life's work. 3 years ago, I handed over daily operations to my son, Brandon Harrison. Brandon is 40 years old, has an MBA from Northwestern University, drives a $90,000 Mercedes, and genuinely believes that business is nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. He's smart, ambitious, and unfortunately, he's spent most of his adult life believing that success can be inherited simply because your last name is printed on the building. For the first few years, things went smoothly. Brandon introduced new software systems, expanded our online operations, and modernized several departments. I was proud of him, at least I wanted to be. Then he started referring to our senior employees as dead weight. He called company traditions outdated, and whenever I disagreed with one of his decisions, he smiled politely and reminded me that times have changed. Maybe they had. But respect shouldn't be one of the things we leave behind. Everything finally came crashing down on a Tuesday morning during our monthly management meeting. Nearly 40 department managers and supervisors were gathered inside our conference room when Brandon slammed a financial report onto the table and pointed directly at me. This company is losing money because we're still running it like it's 1987. The room immediately became silent. Then he said something I'll remember for the rest of my life. You know what the real problem is, Dad. He laughed softly before continuing. We've spent 3 years pretending that you're still useful, simply because you're old enough to remember how this place started. And suddenly, every worker in that room lowered their eyes toward the floor. I wish I could tell you that my son said those words in the heat of the moment. He didn't. He had been practicing them for years. The conference room was so quiet that I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. 40 department managers sat frozen in their seats, pretending to look at their financial reports while avoiding eye contact with me. Brandon wasn't finished. Every decision I make gets questioned because people here still worship the founder, he said as he paced around the room. This isn't a family diner anymore. It's a manufacturing company worth over $60 million. Then he turned toward me and smiled. You know what the biggest problem with this company is, Dad? People are too sentimental. No one spoke. No one moved. He picked up one of the quarterly reports and waved it in the air. We're spending over $300,000 annually on employee assistance programs that make absolutely no business sense. I immediately knew what he was talking about. The Harrison Family Fund. For over 30 years, we had quietly helped employees during difficult times. Cancer treatments, emergency surgeries, funeral expenses, college scholarships for their children. Nobody abused it because everyone understood what it represented. It represented family. To Brandon, however, it represented wasted money. Do you know what every business consultant I've hired tells me? He continued. They all say the same thing. Harrison Industrial would be twice as profitable if we stopped operating like some retirement home charity program. Several workers visibly shifted in their chairs. Many of those men sitting around that table had personally benefited from that fund. Then Brandon looked directly at me. "And before anyone says otherwise, let me save everyone some time. My father built this company 40 years ago. That's wonderful, but that doesn't mean he understands today's business world." He paused for dramatic effect before delivering the sentence that changed everything. "You're just a useless old man who refuses to let go." The words echoed throughout the conference room. A useless old man. After 42 years, after working 16-hour days for nearly 3 decades, after missing birthdays, anniversaries, and vacations because I believed I was building something worth leaving behind. That was what I had become in my son's eyes. I looked around the room. Joe Mitchell, our production manager for 27 years, had tears forming in his eyes. Sarah Collins from Human Resources was staring at the table with her hands folded tightly together. Frank Russo, our head engineer, who had worked beside me since the company employed only 7 people, looked like he was trying very hard not to say something he would regret. I smiled softly, not because Brandon was right, because for the first time in my life, I realized I had failed to teach my son the most important lesson in business. People don't stay loyal to buildings. They stay loyal to people. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. Brandon laughed. "Finally decided to listen?" "No," I replied quietly. "I simply wanted to know whether you've said everything you needed to say." He folded his arms. "Actually, there's one more thing." "Of course there was. I think it's time everyone stops pretending that you're still contributing anything meaningful around here." He looked around the room before continuing. "Starting next month, I want my father completely removed from all company operations." Silence. No applause. No agreement. Just silence. I slowly stood up from my chair and buttoned my suit jacket. "May I ask one question, Brandon?" "Sure." "When was the last time you walked through the factory floor and asked one of our workers how their family was doing?" He frowned. "What does that have to do with anything? When was the last time you attended one of their children's graduations because you promised them you would?" No answer. "When was the last time you sat beside an employee's hospital bed because his wife was undergoing chemotherapy?" The room remained silent. "You think this company was built with steel and machines?" I continued quietly. "It wasn't. It was built with birthdays, funerals, handshakes, and promises." He laughed. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't some emotional support group, Dad. It's business." I nodded slowly. "Then I said something I never imagined I would say to my own son. You're absolutely right." The entire room looked confused. "This is business." I walked toward the front of the conference room and removed my brass nameplate from the door. 42 years of my life fit neatly into my briefcase. Then I turned toward everyone sitting in that room. "Thank you," I said simply, "for trusting me to help build something worth being proud of." Joe Mitchell immediately stood up. "Mr. Harrison," I raised my hand gently. "No speeches, Joe." Then I looked back at Brandon one final time. "You won, son." He smiled triumphantly. Finally, he thought he had inherited the company. What he failed to understand was that a company isn't machinery, inventory, or financial reports. It's the people who choose to walk through those factory doors every morning. And people have something shareholders don't: the freedom to leave. Now I want to ask all of you something. If your own child publicly humiliated you after you spent 40 years building a successful business, would you walk away peacefully or fight for what you built? Comment walk away or fight back. Personally, I chose something far more powerful than either. I simply went home. Because sometimes the loudest thing an old man can do is quietly walk away and let people discover what he was truly worth. 7 days later, my phone rang at 6:17 on a Monday morning. It was Brandon. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad?" For the first time in years, my son didn't sound arrogant. He sounded terrified. "What's wrong?" I asked calmly. "Can you come to the factory?" "No." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Dad, it's empty." I looked out my kitchen window and took a sip of my coffee. "What do you mean it's empty?" "The production floor is shut down. Joe resigned. Frank resigned. Sarah resigned. Our logistics manager left yesterday and 3 department supervisors walked out this morning. He paused before adding quietly, "The Wilson account cancelled their contract." That caught my attention. Wilson Construction had been our largest client for 22 years. "Did they say why?" "Yes," he replied bitterly. "They said they've always done business with Walter Harrison, not Harrison Industrial." I smiled sadly. Within the next 48 hours, 2 more major clients terminated their contracts. 3 suppliers revoked our 60-day payment terms. The factory cafeteria sat empty for the first time in 4 decades. More than 60 senior employees had voluntarily resigned. The younger workers remained, but without the people who had trained them for years, production had nearly stopped. Finally, Brandon asked the question he should have asked years ago. "Dad, why are they leaving?" I leaned back in my chair and answered honestly. "Because they never worked for the factory, son." "What does that mean?" "It means they worked beside people who respected them." Silence. Then I continued. "You inherited my office. You inherited my shares. You inherited my machines, but you never inherited my relationships." He didn't know what to say. "You called me a useless old man in front of my own workers," I said quietly. "The problem wasn't that I was old, Brandon. The problem was that you never understood what made me useful." 3 months later, Brandon came to my home carrying no briefcase, no financial reports, and no pride, only an apology. The truth is, factories aren't built with steel. They're built with trust. And trust takes a lifetime to earn, and only 1 sentence to destroy. Sometimes the greatest lesson a father can teach his son isn't how to build a company. It's what happens when you forget how to value the people who built it with you.